The air was thick with dread, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest as I gripped the steering wheel of my battered 2008 work truck. The Utah desert stretched endlessly before me, a void of pitch-black nothingness swallowing the feeble glow of my high beams. I was alone, stranded on a dirt trail that barely deserved the name road, my heart pounding like a war drum. Something was out there in the dark, watching, waiting. And it wasn't human. I was in my 20s. A mess of ambition tangled with the chaos of addiction. Alcohol and drugs had blurred my life into a haze, but I'd been clawing my way out sober for nearly a year. My memory of that night is fractured like a shattered mirror, reflecting only slivers of terror. I'd moved from Arizona to Salt Lake City for a fresh start, landing a job as a service tech, installing equipment at gas stations across Utah. The gig took me from St. George to Salt Lake, hitting every small town store in between. That night, I was somewhere between Richfield and another forgotten speck on the map, finishing a late job around 10 or 11 p.m. Exhausted, but determined, I decided to drive to the next town rather than face a 2-hour commute in the morning. Google Maps betrayed me. It directed me onto a desolate dirt trail, a supposed shortcut to my destination. Hesitation gnawed at me. Why would a highway app send me down this God-forsaken path? But I turned left, my truck's tires crunching over loose gravel, the only sound in a world cloaked in silence. The darkness was absolute, a living thing that pressed against the windows, unbroken, except for my headlights carving a narrow tunnel ahead. No houses, no lights, just an endless expanse of desert and the skeletal silhouettes of brush lining the trail like silent sentinels. 5, maybe 7 minutes. And my truck sputtered. The engine coughed a sickly rasp and died. I cursed under my breath, slamming it into park. My old 2008 work truck was a relic prone to tantrums. But this felt different, like the desert itself had reached out and choked it. I popped the hood, my flashlight's beam dancing over the engine. Nothing seemed wrong, at least not to my limited mechanic's eye. Frustration turned to dread when I checked my phones. Both my personal and work devices showed no signal, not even a flicker of a bar. I was cut off, marooned in this black abyss. I weighed my options. Wait until dawn, or search for a signal. Sitting still felt like surrender, so I chose to move. I usually carried a firearm, a habit from growing up in Arizona's wilds. But this trip, I'd forgotten it. Instead, I armed myself with a 10-inch pipe wrench and my Milwaukee flashlight, their cold weight, a poor substitute for the gun's reassurance. Stepping out, the desert's chill bit into my skin, the air heavy with the scent of dry earth, and something sharper, unplaceable. The trail was barely paved, more a suggestion than a road flanked by dense brush and twisted trees forming a natural corridor. I wasn't prone to fear years, and Arizona's deserts had hardened me. But each step away from the truck tightened a knot in my gut. 10 minutes into my walk, the silence shattered. A muffled laugh, high and childish, like something from a cartoon, echoed behind me. I spun my flashlight, slicing through the dark, but found nothing. My boots sank into the sandy mud, the ground sucking at my soles, as I pressed forward, heart hammering. Keep moving. Don't stop, I told myself, but the laugh came again, closer, louder, maybe 4 or 5 feet away. Panic surged, adrenaline flooding my veins. I sprinted, brush clawing at my cargo pants, my eyes darting for cover. I didn't believe in ghosts or aliens, but my mind conjured a deranged desert drifter, some meth-fueled predator stalking me. I dove behind a low, mound-like rock, crouching on one knee, pain shooting through my leg as jagged stones dug into my skin. The moon hung high, its pale light casting faint shadows across the barren landscape. My flashlight was off now, its beam too risky a beacon. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one a battle to stay silent. Then in the distance, I saw them, 2 silhouettes, running their forms barely discernible, but unmistakable. They were talking their voices too far to make out words, a low murmur that sent ice down my spine. I wasn't alone out here, and they weren't friendly. Desperation clawed at me. I sent a text to my family and friends, a frantic, "I love you. I'm sorry," knowing it wouldn't send without service. It was a futile act, a prayer in the void. I'm not a small guy, 5'10" to 230 pounds, but unarmed and outnumbered, I felt like prey. The figures didn't leave, circling the area like vultures, their movements erratic, predatory. I gripped 2 small rocks, my hands trembling. I wasn't religious, but I whispered a plea to whatever might listen. With a heave, I hurled the rocks far into the desert, away from the truck. The figures reacted, shouting and scrambling toward the noise, their voices sharp with excitement. I seized the chance. Crouch, walking through the brush, thorns snagging my clothes, and filling my boots. Every rustle, every snap of a twig set my nerves ablaze. Then I heard it, another set of footsteps, heavier, deliberate, a third presence in this nightmare. My truck loomed ahead, its outline a beacon of salvation. Relief flooded me. But it was short-lived. The driver's side door was wide open. I'd locked it, I was sure. Heart in my throat, I checked the back seat, flung the door wider, and leapt inside, slamming it shut. In a moment of reckless instinct, I turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life, a miracle I didn't question. I threw the truck into drive tires, spitting gravel, as I floored it down the dirt trail. In my rearview mirror, hooded figures darted from the brush, ducking, as I sped past their forms, scattering into the darkness like roaches. Rage surged through me. I rolled down the window, hurling my pipe wrench with all my strength at one of them, watching it spin through the air and vanish into the shadows. I screamed into the night, a raw, primal yell, as dust trailed behind me, the truck's engine roaring like my own defiance. The drive was a blur of white-knuckled terror. My teeth gritted, sweat soaking my shirt. I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of two town lights pulling into a 7-Eleven around midnight. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, saw my disheveled state and asked what was wrong. I begged her to call the sheriff. A burly officer arrived, his skepticism clear, as he eyed my tattoos and frantic demeanor. He treated me like a suspect, asking if I'd been drinking or using. I insisted I was sober, but he barely noted my story, dismissing it as a hallucination. A mechanic later fixed my truck a burst hose, he said, free of charge, shaken by my tale. He'd never heard of such an incident in that area. I checked into a motel, maybe a Motel 6, though the name escapes me. Sleep was impossible, the desert's darkness seeping into my mind. I showered, scrubbing the sand and fear from my skin, but the memory clung like a shadow. I quit the job soon after, unrelated reasons piling on to that night's trauma. I left Utah for Florida, hoping distance would dull the terror. A photo from that service call resurfaced recently, dragging the memory back. Who were those figures? A robbery crew targeting my tools? A cult in black robes? Or something worse, something the desert hides in its endless dark? I still hear that laughter sometimes in the quiet of the night and wonder how close I came to never leaving that trail alive. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl, the kind that whispers something's wrong before you even know why. My family and I had checked into Great Wolf Lodge for a weekend getaway, expecting water slides and laughter. It was our 4th time here, a familiar escape where the kids could run wild and we could pretend life was simple. But that night, something waited in the shadows, something that didn't belong. Our suite was perfect. 2 rooms joined by a heavy wooden door, each with its own deadbolt. My wife and I took the adult side, all muted grays and soft linens, while the kids claimed the bunk bedroom decked out with cartoon wolves and glowing stars on the ceiling. The kids, my 6-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter, loved it instantly, their voices echoing as they argued over who got the top bunk. I checked every lock twice. The front door, the conjoining door, the chain that kept the outside world at bay. You don't take chances with your kids. Not ever. The night settled in heavy with the hum of the lodge's air conditioning, and we all drifted to sleep. Midnight came like a thief. I woke to the sound of bare feet slapping against the floor, soft but urgent. My son stood by our bed, his face pale under the dim glow of the nightlight, eyes wide and wet with tears. "Daddy," he said, his voice trembling. "There's something in our room." My heart lurched, but I kept my voice steady. "Bad dream, buddy." He shook his head, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. No, it was real. A big kid, tall with a long neck. He had a dark shadow all around him, moving like smoke. His words sent a chill down my spine, but I chalked it up to imagination. Kids see monsters in every corner. I tucked him back into his bunk, scanned the room, nothing but toys and blankets, and returned to bed uneasy, but convinced it was nothing. 3 hours later, the world turned upside down. My wife bolted upright, her breath, ragged eyes darting in the dark. "Did you hear that she hissed?" I hadn't heard a thing, but her fear was contagious. Someone said, "Mom," loud, like they were right here. I strained to listen, but the room was silent, oppressive. She insisted I check on our daughter, her voice tight with panic. I crossed to the kids' room, the conjoining door still open, and found my daughter curled in the corner, not on her bunk. Her face was streaked with tears, her chest heaving. "Daddy, he's still here," she whispered, pointing at the shadows. I scooped her up, her body trembling against mine, and carried her to our bed. She told us what she saw, her voice barely audible. "I thought it was you at first, Daddy, walking toward the bunk. But it wasn't. It was taller, skinnier, with a neck too long, like it didn't fit right. Its skin was white smooth, like paper, no wrinkles, no face." My stomach twisted as she spoke. It came close right up to my bed. I hid under the blanket, but I saw it walk toward your room. I was so scared it'd hear me breathing. I asked if it could have been a blanket, a trick of the light, but she shook her head. It moved like a person, but wrong, It didn't make a sound. My wife's face drained of color. "I heard Mom," she said again, but she didn't say it. Our daughter nodded, eyes wide. I didn't say anything. I was too scared it'd find me. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in the air thick with something I couldn't name. I turned on every light, checked every corner under the beds behind the curtains. The locks were secure, the windows sealed. No one could have gotten in. But the fear lingered a weight on my chest. I stayed awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the conjoining door. My wife eventually drifted off. Our kids nestled between us, but sleep wouldn't come for me. The closet light flickered, then died. I tried the switch, but it wouldn't budge. I turned on the bathroom light, instead, its harsh glow spilling into the room. Then it came soft, at first, then louder, a knocking on the conjoining door. My heart stopped. I told myself it was the front door, a neighbor, anything normal. But I knew where it came from. I crept toward the door, my pulse thundering, and opened it. The kids' room was empty, the bunks untouched, the air still. I locked the door from our side, my hands shaking. An hour later, my wife stirred her body, rigid. She was muttering, her face twisted in terror. I shook her awake, and she gasped, eyes wild. "I was trapped," she said, her voice breaking. "In a dream," but it felt real. I woke up in our bed, went to the bathroom, but when I came out, I was in the kids' room. The door was locked, and something was with me. Something evil. It was coming closer, and I was banging on the door, screaming for you. I held her, but my mind raced. The knocking I'd heard, was it her dream? Or something else? Morning brought no relief. As we packed to leave, a strange smell filled the kids' room, like incense, heavy and sweet, unlike anything from the day before. It clung to the air unnatural, as if something had been summoned and lingered still. We grabbed our bags and left the kids silent, my wife's face pale. I drove us home, the lodge fading in the rear view, but the memory of that night burned into me. I've never believed in ghosts. Not really. But what my kids saw, what my wife heard, what I felt, it wasn't imagination. Two children hours apart described the same thing. A tall, long-necked figure, its skin too white, its presence wrong. My son saw glowing eyes. My daughter saw no face. The differences haunt me as much as the similarities. What was it standing in their room, watching them sleep? The knocking, the smell. My wife's dream, they're pieces of a puzzle I can't solve. I think about it every night, lying awake, wondering if it followed us home. My heart thudded against my ribs as the dashboard clock flickered to 11:47 p.m., the city's neon glow fading into the black void of the highway ahead. I'd been driving for Lyft all night, ferrying strangers through the urban maze, their faces blurring into a forgettable haze. Most were polite, some quiet, others lost in their phones. Easy money, I told myself, a side gig to patch the gaps between paychecks at my day job. But something about this night felt off, like a shadow, creeping just beyond my headlights. Then, my phone lit up with a new request, $25, for a 45-minute ride. Not bad. I tapped accept, unaware that I was about to pick up the passenger who'd haunt me for weeks. I pulled into the lot of a upscale Japanese grill, its red lanterns casting an eerie glow against the run-down dispensary next door. The air was thick with the scent of soy sauce and weed, a strange mix that clung to my skin as I parked out of traffic's way. I hit arrive and waited, scanning the lot for my rider. 2 minutes passed. 3. Nobody. Just the hum of my engine and the distant thrum of city life. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows near the grill's entrance, moving with an unnatural gait, like a puppet jerked by invisible strings. My breath caught as she approached my rear passenger door. She didn't open it. Instead, she pressed her palms against the glass, her body leaning forward until her face nearly touched the paint. A low, guttural chuckle spilled from her lips, chilling my spine. I froze my hand, hovering over the gear shift, every instinct screaming to drive away. But $25 was $25, right. Then, in a motion that defied human anatomy, she bent backward, her torso arcing until her head nearly grazed her calves, her laughter growing louder, sharper, like nails on a chalkboard. My mouth went dry. I'd seen drunks, addicts, even folks lost in their own minds. But this was something else. She straightened abruptly, her silhouette framed by the dim street light, and yanked the door open. Sliding into the back seat, she settled directly behind me, her presence a weight pressing against my shoulders. "Hi, are you the rider?" I forced out, deepening my voice to mask the tremor. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes glinting in the rearview mirror, not at me, but at the mirror itself, as if seeing something I couldn't. "Yeah, that'd be me. Mr. Rubberman," she said, her voice a sickly sweet drawl, laced with an edge that made my skin crawl. Mr. Rubberman. Where did that come from? I noticed a small bag left by my last rider on the seat beside her. "Someone dropped a thing back here," she said, her fingers brushing the fabric, her tone shifting to a snicker. I swallowed hard, asking her to pass it to the front so I could return it later. She complied, but her gaze never left the rear view. Her eyes boring into the glass like she was communing with it. "Ain't you gonna call her?" she asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I shrugged, explaining I'd wait for a claim my usual protocol. But her stare didn't waver, and I felt exposed, like she was peeling back my thoughts layer by layer. I started driving the city lights streaking past, but the car felt smaller, the air heavier, as if her presence sucked the oxygen out. I've driven hundreds of riders, seen all kinds, chatty drunks, silent suits, giggling teens. But this woman was different, a puzzle with jagged edges that didn't fit. Her speech was odd, not just country twang, but stilted, like she was reciting lines from a broken script. I've volunteered with folks battling mental scars, seen the chaos of fractured minds, so I tried to stay calm, professional. But every glance in the rear view tightened the knot in my gut. She shifted in her seat, her breath audible now, a slow rasp that synced with the engine's hum. "Can we stop at a UPS store?" she asked suddenly, her voice casual but insistent. I frowned, glancing at the GPS. "Which one?" She waved a hand vaguely. "Just a UPS. Gotta get a package to spring my friend from jail. If I don't, he's stuck overnight, and someone'll kill him. He's in for killing, you know." My blood ran cold. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles whitening, but kept my face neutral. Killing. Was she joking? Her eyes flicked to mine in the mirror, a smile curling her lips too wide, too knowing. "Nah, never mind," she said, her tone flipping like a switch. "Let's keep rollin'. You lift guys don't make much, do ya?" I forced a nervous laugh, mumbling something about it being fine. But my mind was racing. Why mention murder so casually? Why the sudden pivot? The highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by darkness, and I felt trapped. Her presence, a noose tightening with every mile. She leaned back, humming softly, her fingers tapping the seat in a rhythm that felt wrong, too deliberate. "Nice car," she said abruptly, her voice slicing through the silence. "What kind of car this be?" I muttered, a vague response praising its reliability. But she wasn't listening. She turned to the empty seat beside her, her head cocked, as if hearing a reply. "No, it's his car," she snapped, her voice sharp, directed at nothing. "He don't want to do that. Stop it." My pulse spiked. I glanced back, my voice unsteady. "Everything okay back there?" She blinked her smile, returning too quick, too forced. "Oh, my friend just likes your car. Mr. Rubberman, friend. There was no one else in the car, just her, and that suffocating aura. I told myself people can be quirky, eccentric, but this felt deeper, darker, like she was tethered to something I couldn't see. The highway's monotony was a lifeline, the white lines grounding me as her voice filled the car again. You think it's okay to steal if you gotta? She asked, her tone deceptively light. I shrugged, unsure how to answer without stepping into her trap. Like if I'm starving and there's bread in a store, I can take it, right? Especially if I work there. She laughed, a hollow sound, then spun toward the trunk, her voice rising. I got money, right? Mr. Rubberman, I got a job, so I ain't poor. Her agitation grew her words, tumbling out in a frantic stream, railing against poverty, against some unseen accuser. Then she addressed the trunk directly, her voice low, commanding. Tell her to simmer down. He's a nice man. My hands trembled on the wheel. She was talking to the trunk now. What was back there? I hadn't checked it since my last shift, but it was empty, wasn't it? The thought gnawed at me, a seed of panic sprouting roots. I focused on the road, the yellow lines blurring as my mind spiraled. Her smirk caught my eye in the rear view, her teeth jagged, some missing glinting under the passing streetlights. I don't judge, I told myself. Life's hard, people break. But when her friend started whispering about death, I cared. I cared a lot. Ain't you sleepy, honey? She cooed, her voice soft, almost maternal, but laced with menace. They say you're real sleepy. You like boba? I shook my head, avoiding her gaze, my voice tight. No, I'm good. Thanks. She pressed closer, her breath hot against the headrest. I'll pay if we stop. Pull over, take a nap. Her teeth bared in a grin, and I felt my resolve fraying my foot, itching to slam the gas. Every fiber of my being screamed to get out, to abandon the car, the gig, everything. But I needed the money, and she was just a passenger, right? Just a weird, broken soul. Or was she? She leaned forward again, her bony finger jabbing my shoulder, a shock of cold shooting through me. How's your body feel, Mr. Rubberman? You sure you don't need to eat? I could feed you if you pull over. Her words dripped with intent, each syllable a hook sinking deeper. I stammered a refusal, my voice barely audible over the roar of blood in my ears. Then, out of nowhere, she hissed at the trunk. You killed her, so it is what it is. My vision tunneled. Killed who was she confessing? Threatening. I couldn't tell anymore, the line between reality and nightmare dissolving. At a stop sign, she leaned so close I felt her breath on my neck, her finger poking again harder. He ain't sleepy, is he? He's gonna kill someone if he don't sleep. Someone's gonna die. He's got two choices he choose. My voice cracked as I asked, "Who's gonna kill someone?" She froze, her face twisting into anger, then smoothed over. "Nothing. No one." The lie was palpable, a venomous thing slithering between us. I drove, on the destination pin, nearing my hands slick with sweat. Just get her out, I told myself. Drop her off, and it's over. We reached her stop, a nondescript apartment block, shrouded in darkness. She lingered her hand on the door, then stepped out, her voice syrupy. "Thanks for being patient, Mr. Rubberman. Don't forget to eat." She moved to my window, pressing her face against the glass. Her smile, a grotesque mask, eyes gleaming with something unholy. I floored it, the car lurching forward. Her image burned into my mind. I didn't drive for Lyft for a week. Every night, I checked the trunk, the back seat, even under the car, half expecting her to be there waiting. I still see her in the rear view. Sometimes her eyes locked on the mirror, smiling. And I wonder, what was she really talking to? The barn loomed like a forgotten relic, its sagging silhouette etched against the fading dusk. I was 16, heart pounding, with the thrill of trespassing. But something about this place felt wrong. Too quiet, too still, as if the air itself held its breath. My mom, usually the voice of caution, stood beside me, her eyes glinting with a reckless spark I'd never seen before. We were urban explorers, chasing secrets in abandoned places. But tonight, we'd uncover something that would haunt us forever. I was 16, living in a city that felt both vast and suffocating, with just 250,000 souls sprawled across 30 miles. Back then, it was a sleepy hub, dotted with vacant lots and crumbling buildings, ripe for exploration. My friends had tagged along once, but after I accidentally stepped on a homeless man hidden under blankets, they swore off my adventures. I couldn't blame them. The man's startled yell nearly stopped my heart. Alone, I was too chicken to keep going, so my hobby stalled until I mentioned an abandoned farm to my mom. I'd spotted it from my school bus, its overgrown fields and weathered barn whispering stories of neglect. To my surprise, she didn't lecture me about danger. Instead, she grinned, her eyes alight with mischief, and said she'd come along. Mom was no stranger to bending rules. A single parent of 3, she'd bounced between substances, her addiction a shadow that flared at dusk when her stash ran dry. But she wasn't reckless, just tough, unafraid of confrontation. I hesitated. Was it lame to explore with my mom? But her truck was my only ride. So I agreed. We pulled into the farm's driveway at 7 p.m., dusk painting the sky in bruised purples. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting wood. The driveway choked with weeds snaking through cracked pavement. A mile-long path wound through dense woods over a creek before opening into a field where the barn stood its slanted frame sinking into the earth like a wounded beast. I handed Mom a pocket knife, its blade glinting faintly. She eyed it warily, but tucked it into her jeans, taking the lead as we crossed the field. The grass brushed our knees, whispering secrets we couldn't decipher. We talked about how nice it'd be to own a place like this, free from our cramped apartment's peeling walls. The barn grew closer, its wooden doors, towering 10 feet high, already propped open. My pulse quickened. Open doors meant someone might be inside, but it also spared us the effort of breaking in. As we rounded the entrance, Mom froze her arm, shooting out to stop me. Propped on a stick was a neon mascot, its yellow and blue canine features garish in the dim light. That thing scared the life out of me, Mom said, her voice tight. She nudged it with her boot, lifting it by a dingy ear. What is this? I recognized it instantly, thanks to my internet-raised brain. It's a fursuit head, like what furries wear. Her face twisted in disgust. What? Is this some kind of sex thing? I laughed, teasing her, with a half-truth about furry parties, knowing it'd get a reaction. She mimed gagging, tossing the head aside. Let's hope no one's still here, she muttered, then shouted into the barn. Hey, if you're in there, I've got my 16-year-old daughter with me, so knock it off. I cringed, urging her to be quieter, but she shrugged. We've been here half an hour. Anyone with ears knows we're here. We stepped inside the barn's air, heavy with dust and decay, like a wood pile left to rot. Soft evening light filtered through rafter windows, illuminating stables below and a loft piled with decomposing hay. To our left, a small office held scattered logbooks and rusted supplies. Nothing valuable. As we crossed to the other side, Mom gasped, pointing to 4 saddles hung 5 feet up the wall. These are worth a fortune, she whispered, already calculating Craigslist profits. They were heavy, their leather cracked, but sturdy, mounted on brackets that fought our efforts to free them. We hauled the first 2 to the truck, adrenaline buzzing, then returned for the others. As Mom wrestled with the 3rd saddle, I heard it a rustle, faint but deliberate, behind us. Dusk had deepened the barn, now a maze of shadows. I spun my pocket knife out, scanning the stalls. Nothing moved, but the air felt charged, like a storm about to break. "Mom," I hissed. "Someone's here." She paused, the barn falling silent. But before she could reply, a dark figure shifted in a stall, cutting her off. My heart lurched. Mom yanked me behind her, her body tense, knife raised. "I see you," she called, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. "Leave us alone. We're going in a minute." The figure laughed, a deep, gravelly sound that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't make out details, clad in black. Maybe my height swallowed by shadows. "No, I don't think so," they said, stepping closer. Mom's grip on her knife tightened, her voice low and fierce. "Stay back. My kid's here. We'll leave now, but if you hurt her, I'll fight you until there's nothing left of me." The figure laughed again, their steps slow, deliberate, meant to intimidate. "Run. Get out." My mind screamed, but my legs felt rooted. I'd driven us here, but my novice skills wouldn't outrun a pursuer. The keys were in my pocket, my hands fumbling to free them without drawing attention. The figure was closer now, maybe 100 feet away, their voice taunting. "Threatening me, miss. We might have a problem." I slid the keys into Mom's hand, hoping she'd feel them and bolt. Instead, she exploded forward, charging the figure and shoving them into the dirt. "Run!" she yelled. I sprinted, my lungs burning, reaching the passenger door as Mom hit the driver's side. The truck was unlocked, a stroke of luck. She jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring as we peeled out, doing a U-turn through the field. I glanced back, heart in my throat, expecting the figure to be clinging to the truck. Instead, I saw a man, white dark hair, maybe in his 30s, raising a gun. A shot cracked, and Mom cursed tires screaming as we burst onto the road. We raced home, panting adrenaline. Spiking. Mom checked the truck, no bullet holes, just our frayed nerves. We didn't call the police. Trespassing and her paranoia about her addiction history kept us silent. 15 years later, we rarely speak of it, mentioning only that time we got shot at. The saddles fetched $300 each in 2007, a small win against the terror. I never explored again, the barn's shadow, lingering in my dreams. Who was he? A squatter, guarding his turf. A predator, lying in wait. The gun's glint and that laugh still echo a reminder of how close we came to not making it out. Every creak of an old house, every shadow in an empty lot brings me back to that barn wondering what we'd have found if we'd stayed just a moment longer. The silence in that apartment wasn't just quiet. It was alive, watching, waiting for you to notice. I'd just moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, fresh out of the Navy, chasing a new start with my GI Bill and a cheap 3-bedroom apartment. My roommates, Zachariah and Jamie, seemed decent enough at first. Zach, a lanky guy from Altoona, Pennsylvania, was easy to get along with, always cracking jokes over beers at the restaurant where we both worked. Jamie, though, was a ghost in his own home, always heading back to Winston-Salem, leaving his room locked, and his presence scarce. That apartment should have been a haven, but something about it felt wrong from the start, like the walls held secrets they weren't ready to share. The place was old, its hardwood floors scuffed and uneven, the air heavy with the faint tang of mildew. My room was at the end of a narrow hallway, Zach's across from it, and Jamie's tucked beside the living room, its door always shut. The first few weeks were uneventful, just the hum of city life seeping through the windows, the clatter of dishes as Zach and I cooked. But one night, alone in the apartment, I felt the shift. I was at Zach's desk surfing the web, waiting for him to get off his shift so we could hit the drag racetrack. The air grew thick, pressing against my skin, and then I heard it, a single sharp sound, like a sheet of paper slipping to the floor. I froze my eyes, darting to the hallway. The sound came from Jamie's room. I was sure of it. Nobody was home. Zach was at work. Jamie gone for the weekend. I stood my boots heavy on the creaking floor and moved toward the sound. The living room was dark, the kitchen empty, the laundry room still. I hesitated at Jamie's door, my hand hovering over the knob. "You're imagining things," I told myself, but my pulse said otherwise. I checked every corner of the apartment, even my own room, but found nothing. Just silence, heavier now, like it was mocking me. Days passed, and I tried to shrug it off. Zach and I laughed about it, over burgers blaming old pipes or rats. But the apartment didn't let me forget. One evening, I was alone again, sprawled on the couch with a soda, the TV droning in the background. The air shifted colder, sharper, like a blade against my neck. I sat up, scanning the room, and that's when it happened. A force, invisible but undeniable, slammed into my chest as I neared Jamie's door. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall, my vision swimming with a crimson haze. For a split second, everything was red. My head light, my heart pounding like a war drum. I gasped, clutching my chest, but the pressure was gone as quickly as it came. I stared at Jamie's door, its faded paint suddenly menacing. What the hell was that? My Navy training kicked in assess, act, survive. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was my home, and it had just attacked me. I grabbed my keys and bolted, driving to the racetrack an hour early, my hands shaking on the wheel. When Zach showed up, I spilled everything, my voice low, half expecting him to laugh. But his face darkened, his eyes avoiding mine. "Man, that's crazy," he said, then paused. "I've seen stuff in Jamie's room too. Last week, I went in to grab a charger he borrowed. In the closet, there were these claw marks, glowing, like they were burned into the wood. My stomach dropped. Glowing, I pressed, leaning closer. Zach nodded, his voice barely audible. Yeah, like they were alive, pulsing. I got out fast, didn't tell Jamie. Figured I was seeing things. We sat in silence, the racetrack's roar fading into the background. Zach's story wasn't just creepy, it was a confirmation. Something was in that room, something that didn't want us there. The next day, after class, we confronted Jamie. He was in the living room, packing a duffel bag, his face pale, his movements hurried. "What's going on in your room, man?" I asked, my voice steady but firm. Zach stood beside me, arms crossed. Jamie froze, his eyes darting between us, then to his door. "It's nothing," he mumbled, but his hands trembled. We pressed harder, telling him about the paper, the push, the claw marks. His shoulders slumped, and he sank onto the couch, his voice breaking. "Ever since my grandmother died, something's been with me. It started at home, small things, lights flickering, doors opening. Now it's here. I've felt it, watching me always." I stared at him, my mind racing. "What is it?" I asked, but Jamie just shook his head. "I don't know, but it's not the first time. Others have felt it too." He looked at his door, his eyes hollow. "I'm leaving. I can't stay here." That night, he was gone. His room was empty, his furniture vanished, like he'd never been there. His father mailed us a check for his share of the rent, but we never heard from Jamie again. No calls, no texts, nothing. I moved into his room, bigger and closer to the living room, telling myself it was practical. The claw marks were gone, the walls bare the air normal. Months passed, and nothing happened. No sounds, no pushes, no glowing marks. But every night I locked that door, my eyes lingering on the closet, half expecting something to step out. "It's gone," I told myself, but doubt gnawed at me. What had Jamie brought into our home? And where did it go? Years before, when I was a kid, My uncle told me a story I'd buried deep. He'd worked on a ship in the Pacific, a freighter that carried more than cargo. One night, off the coast of Guam, he felt a shove in his bunk, hard enough to bruise. His bunkmate saw scratches on the wall, faint but glowing, like they were carved by something angry. The crew whispered about a stowaway spirit tied to a sailor who'd died on board. They burned salt, prayed, and it stopped. I'd laughed it off, then a sailor's tale to scare a kid. Now in Jamie's room, I wondered, was it the same kind of thing, a shadow that clings to a person, waiting for a crack to slip through? I don't live in Charlotte anymore. I left that apartment, left Zach, left the memories of that room. But I carry it with me, a weight I can't shake. Every time I hear a sound in the dark, every time I feel a chill, I'm back there, standing at Jamie's door, waiting for it to push me again. It's out there somewhere, and it knows my name. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy fog cloaking the Japanese countryside, but my heart was already racing as I gripped the wheel of my tiny Kia, the engine's hum, a frail shield against the dread pooling in my gut. I was 24, a fledgling English teacher in a foreign land, my grasp of Japanese as shaky as my confidence behind the wheel. Today, I was late, unforgivably late, for my preschool class, and the thought of my stern boss's disapproval sent my foot heavier on the gas. The road blurred past a patchwork of rice fields and distant mountains, but something felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't know then that a single lane change would turn my routine drive into a nightmare that still haunts my every turn. The clock on the dashboard mocked me, ticking closer to 8:30 a.m. As I pushed the Kia, my Spaniano Mazda, a boxy relic I'd sunk a month's pay into, down the right lane, Japan's fast lane. I rarely drove here, preferring the slower left lane where I could soak in the scenery, cherry blossoms in spring, or the endless green of summer paddies. But today, there was no time for beauty. My students, those wide-eyed 3-year-olds, were waiting, and I couldn't afford another lecture from my boss. The lane ahead began to narrow, merging into traffic, and I spotted a gap in front of a silver sedan. I floored it, the engine, whining in protest, and slid in front 2 car lengths ahead. A clean move, I thought, despite the speed. I followed the rules mostly. But in the rearview mirror, the sedan's headlights flared, closing the distance with alarming speed. My stomach twisted. Was he angry? I brushed it off, urging the cars ahead to move faster. My focus split between the road and the ticking clock. I didn't notice him tailing me. Not at first. The preschool was a 30-minute drive a mundane stretch of asphalt I knew by heart, but today it felt endless. The fog thickened, swallowing the horizon, and the sedan stayed close, its presence a shadow I couldn't shake. I pulled into the school's parking lot, an abandoned gas station, its rusted pumps looming like ghosts in the mist. My usual spot was taken, forcing me to park near the edge, the gravel crunching under my tires. I grabbed my purse, my phone, my lesson plans, mentally bracing for the chaos of teaching toddlers. Then a shadow fell across my window. A man stood there, his face contorted, his fists clenched. My heart lurched. I assumed he was a parent, maybe upset about a late drop-off. I rolled down the window, forcing a smile, my broken Japanese ready to apologize. "Konnichiwa, is something wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. He wasn't a parent. He was a storm of rage. A stranger whose screams shattered the morning calm. His voice exploded in a torrent of Japanese words I couldn't grasp, spat with such venom. I recoiled against my seat. The air filled with the sharp scent of his sweat, his breath clouding in the chilly air. "Keisatsu," he shouted, "police." I caught that word along with "usotsuki," liar, and "okaru," angry. Toddlers and their parents arriving for class froze their eyes wide as this man loomed over my car, his hands slamming against the window frame. I was 24, alone, a foreigner in a country I barely understood, and this man was accusing me of what? Trying to kill him. My mind raced, replaying the lane change. Had I cut him off that badly? I stammered, apologies, my Japanese faltering, but his screams drowned me out, his face inches from mine, eyes wild with fury. Every instinct screamed to lock the doors, to drive away. But I was trapped by his rage, by the eyes of parents and children, watching by my own need to stay professional. He demanded I follow him across the street to a supermarket lot, his finger jabbing toward the road. I nodded, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. Why did I agree? First, I needed him away from the kids, their small faces pale with confusion. Second, the gas station lot was a dead end boxed in by rusted pumps and a sagging fence. The supermarket offered open space, a chance to escape if things escalated. Third, I wanted him back in his car, not towering over mine. And fourth, God help me. He said the police were waiting there, claiming I'd tried to kill him. Kill him. The accusation was absurd, but his rage was real, and I wasn't taking chances. I drove across the street, my engine still running, my eyes darting to the rear view as he parked 2 rows ahead, his glare burning through the fog. I sat there, the car idling, the silence deafening. My phone buzzed texts from my boss asking where I was. I typed a frantic explanation, my fingers fumbling, but I didn't send it yet. The man stood by his car, staring his silhouette, a dark smear against the supermarket's fluorescent glow. Then, 2 police officers arrived, their cruiser pulling up with a quiet authority that felt like salvation. One approached the man, who gestured wildly, pointing at me, demanding they watch some video dashcam footage, I assumed. The other officer walked to my window, his face calm but unreadable. Using Google Translate, he asked for my license and my side of the story. "I don't know what happened," I said, my voice cracking. I passed him on the road, and he followed me here yelling. The officer nodded, checking my international license, his fingers tapping the screen as he translated my words. He asked if the man had touched me, hit me. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind, but now it did. Could he have? I shook my head. No, I just want him gone. Minutes dragged, like hours each second, a weight pressing on my chest. The officers spoke to the man, their voices low, their gestures firm. He argued, his arms flailing, but eventually climbed into his car and sped off, tires screeching on the wet pavement. The officers stood by my car, a protective barrier, until they were sure he was gone. "You're free to go," one said through the translator. "No ticket, no charges." I nodded, numb, and drove back to the school, my hands still trembling. But the fear didn't end there. On the 30-minute drive home, every car behind me felt like his every headlight a threat. The road, a single lane each way, offered no escape, no side streets to duck into. I gripped the wheel, my breath shallow, checking the rear view obsessively. 5 minutes of a car trailing me was enough to send my heart into overdrive, my mind replaying his screams, his wild eyes. That day changed me. For months, I couldn't drive without scanning for followers, my pulse spiking at every tailgater. I'd make random turns, pull over, sit in silence until my breathing steadied. Japan, with its serene landscapes and polite smiles, became a maze of potential threats. I'd lie awake at night, replaying the moment he appeared at my window, wondering what he'd have done if I'd refused to follow him. The embarrassment stung too. Parents, whispering students staring my boss's curt reply to my text. I was a foreigner, an outsider, and this man's rage had exposed my vulnerability. Even now, years later, a car lingering too long in my rear view sends a chill down my spine, a reminder of that morning when a simple drive became a nightmare I can't escape. The whisper came like a blade in the dark, slicing through the silence of my grandmother's room. "Hi," it said, soft as a breath, yet it pinned me to the bed, my child's heart racing. I was 5, lying beside Grandma, her snores a steady rhythm. But that voice wasn't hers. It came from the shadows from the closet or the bathroom beyond, and it knew I was awake. It wasn't the first time, nor the last, but that night I learned something lived in her room. Something that watched, waited, and spoke. I was a small kid, barely vayo, living with my mom's side of the family in a crowded house. My uncle's cousins, aunt, and grandma filled the rooms, their voices a constant hum. After my 5th birthday, we moved to my dad's family, but every Friday, I'd return to Grandma's for a sleepover. Her room was my sanctuary, her bed, a warm cocoon where I'd curl up beside her. She'd fall asleep fast, her breathing deep and even, but sleep eluded me. I'd lie there, eyes tracing the ceiling's cracks, the dim glow of a nightlight casting soft shadows. The room was cozy, with floral curtains and old photos on the dresser. But at night, it changed, became a place where the air grew heavy, charged with an unseen presence. That first night, the whisper startled me. "Hi," it said. Or maybe, "Oh, hi," a faint murmur from the direction of the bathroom or closet, both hidden behind closed doors. I froze, my blanket pulled tight, straining to hear over my own heartbeat. It wasn't Grandma. She was snoring, oblivious. I told myself it was my cousin, the one who loved to tease, sneaking through a vent from his room. But the voice came again, every few seconds, relentless, like a clock ticking in the dark. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, but it didn't. It was real, not in my head, a presence that seemed to lean closer with each whisper. I complained to my family the next morning, my voice trembling. Grandma and my aunt brushed it off, saying my cousin was pranking me through a bathroom vent. I wanted to believe them, but the voice didn't match his mocking tone. It was too soft, too deliberate, almost inviting. I kept sleeping in Grandma's room, too stubborn to admit fear, but the whispers persisted, random, yet always when she slept. I'd bury my face in the pillow, the scent of her lavender soap grounding me. But the voice wormed its way in a thread of dread, stitching through my nights. Eventually, I told my mom, and she forbade me from sleeping there. I stopped until I was 10, switching to an inflatable mattress in the living room with a new cousin. The whispers didn't follow me there, but the memory clung like damp air. Years passed, and I thought I'd outgrown the fear, chalking it up to a kid's imagination. But in 2021, at Grandma's birthday, the past resurfaced. My baby brother, just months old, screamed inconsolably in her room during a diaper. Change, his tiny face contorted in terror. We moved him to another room, and he calmed instantly. I noticed it then, how he only cried in Grandma's room, as if he saw something I couldn't. I'd heard babies could sense things, their eyes catching glimpses of the unseen until their first tooth broke through. I didn't buy it fully, but it nagged at me, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. In 2023, driving Grandma to soccer practice, I brought up the whispers. I was older now, dabbling in paranormal fiction, and her room was my muse. She remembered my complaints, and to my shock, shared her own stories. One cousin, now in the Navy, had stayed in the room next to hers. He'd heard banging through the wall, finding a portrait on the floor, its hook still secure. He'd rehang it, only for it to fall again, as if lifted and dropped by unseen hands. Grandma herself had woken to a child's cry one night, the sound echoing from nowhere. She'd searched the room, flashlight trembling, but found nothing, just the same heavy air I'd felt as a kid. The stories piled up, each one a weight on my chest. The portrait, a faded image of a family I didn't know, seemed to anchor the presence. The crying child, the whispers, they weren't random. Something lingered in that room, tethered to its walls. I thought back to those nights, the voice's insistence, its patience. It hadn't hurt me, but it wanted my attention, like a guest who wouldn't leave. I wondered if it was lonely, trapped in a space it couldn't escape, or if it was something darker biding its time. I don't sleep in Grandma's room anymore. The house feels different now, its warmth dimmed by those memories. I've tried to rationalize it. Old pipes, creaky floors, a cousin's prank. But the pieces don't fit. The whispers were too clear, the timing too precise. My brother's cries, my cousin's portrait, Grandma's child in the night, they point to something real, something that watches from the shadows. I'm not a believer, not fully, but that room changed me. It's why I write ghost stories, chasing the fear I can't explain. What was it? A spirit tied to the house, a memory etched into its walls, or something older, something that knows my name and waits for me to listen again. I still hear that whisper sometimes in the quiet of my own room and wonder if it followed me or if it never left. The moment I stepped into that apartment, I felt it a shadow that wasn't mine trailing me through the rooms. After my divorce, I needed a fresh start, a place to rebuild. My best friend found me a second-floor apartment in a rough part of town, a lease takeover from her sister. It was affordable, close to work, and big enough for me and my dog, a Great Dane named Luna. The building sat above a small restaurant, its neon sign buzzing faintly at night. I moved in alone, my ex taking his cats, leaving me with empty rooms and a quiet I wasn't used to. But the quiet wasn't empty. Something else lived here, and it was watching. The apartment had a strange layout, a kitchen opening to a living room, a long hallway with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a laundry room at the far end. My art studio was the spare bedroom, filled with canvases and a small desk where I'd watch YouTube while painting. I was meticulous about my laptop, always shutting it down, locking the studio door to keep Luna out. She was a gentle giant, sleeping on her futon at the foot of my bed, never wandering far. The first year with my ex was uneventful, but one night, everything changed. I woke in the dark, my heart pounding to the sound of voices. Not loud, but clear, like a TV left on low. I sat up, Luna still snoring, and listened. The voices came from the living room, where my ex's gaming setup used to be. I thought maybe a cat had jumped on his old desk, but the cats were gone. I crept out of bed, the floor cold under my feet, and checked the living room. Empty. The kitchen was dark. The laundry room saw it. Then I realized the sound wasn't from the living room. It was from my studio. I stood frozen in the hallway. The door to my studio closed tight just as I'd left it. But the voices grew louder, a muffled conversation, like a YouTube video playing on loop. My pulse raced. I turned that laptop off. I always did. It needed a password, and the door was locked. I pushed the door open, my breath shallow, expecting to see Luna or a glitch. The room was dark, but the laptop screen glowed a video playing a true crime documentary I hadn't touched in weeks. I slammed it shut, unplugged it, and checked the lock. Untouched. My hands shook as I backed out, locking the door again. Luna didn't stir, but the air felt heavier, like someone was standing just behind me. Days turned into weeks, and the apartment grew stranger. A smell began to haunt me. Stale cigarette smoke, sharp and bitter, drifting through the rooms. I'd catch it in the laundry room, thick enough to choke, or in the hallway, faint but unmistakable. I didn't smoke. My ex didn't. My friend's sister, who'd lived here before, swore she never did either. I tore the place apart, checking vents, cabinets, even the walls for hidden sources. Nothing. The smell came and went, unpredictable, like a guest who didn't knock. I started to feel eyes on me, a prickling on my neck, especially when I was alone. "You're just stressed," I told myself, but the feeling grew a constant weight, as if the apartment itself was watching. Luna noticed it too. One night at 2 a.m., I woke to her low growl, deep and guttural, her body rigid on her futon. She stared at the open bedroom door, her eyes locked on the hallway. I shushed her, straining to hear, and there it was. Footsteps slow and deliberate, moving from the living room toward my room. My heart stopped. I grabbed the pistol under my bed, my hands slick with sweat, and crept to the doorway. The hallway was empty, the shadows still, but the footsteps kept coming closer, heavier. Luna's growls grew louder, her teeth bared, but when I stepped into the hall, the sound stopped. I checked every room, every lock, every window, all secure. No one was there, but Luna wouldn't settle. Her eyes fixed on the darkness, seeing something I couldn't. My boyfriend started staying over his presence, a small comfort. He didn't believe in ghosts, laughed off my stories, but even he felt it. One night, he woke in a panic, his breath, ragged eyes wild. "It's like something's in here," he whispered, clutching my hand, "like it's waiting." I nodded, my throat tight. We tried to ignore it, to live normally, but the apartment wouldn't let us. One evening, as we lay in bed, I heard it, the sharp sound of the silverware drawer in the kitchen sliding open, then slamming shut. I froze, my boyfriend's arm tensing around me. We didn't move, didn't speak, just listened to the silence that followed, heavy and wrong. In the morning, the drawer was closed, the silverware untouched, but I knew what I'd heard. I started talking to the restaurant owner downstairs, a gruff man named Tony, who'd seen it all. Over coffee, I spilled everything: the laptop, the smoke, the footsteps, Luna's growls. His face hardened, and he leaned closer. "You're not the first," he said, his voice low. "Customers see things, cans flying off shelves, shadows in the corners. Employees feel watched, like something's breathing down their necks." He paused, his eyes dark. "The guy who lived in your place before he messed with a Ouija board thought it was a game. After that, things got bad. We had a medium come in, said there's an energy vortex in the basement pulling things in." My blood ran cold. A Ouija board. I'd never touched one, never wanted to, but the idea that it had been used here in my home made my skin crawl. Tony's words stuck with me, a warning I couldn't shake. I started sleeping with the lights on, checking the locks obsessively, but the feeling of being watched never left. Luna stayed closer, her eyes always on the hallway, her growls a constant reminder that we weren't alone. Years ago, my aunt told me a story I'd laughed off. She'd lived in an old house in her 20s, a place where the air turned sour at night. She'd hear footsteps, see shadows move, and once her dog, a big shepherd like Luna, stared at the ceiling, growling at nothing. She found cigarette butts in the attic, though no one smoked. A neighbor said the house had been a speakeasy, a place where dark deals were made. She moved out after a month, never looked back. I thought it was just a story, but now in my apartment, I wondered, was this thing a leftover from that board? A guest that never left? I moved out soon after taking Luna and leaving the apartment behind. But the memories cling to me sharp and cold. Every creak in my new place, every shadow in the corner, sends my heart racing. It's still out there, waiting for someone else to move in. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real. And I know it's not done with me. The storm raged outside. A howling beast clawing at my windows, as if the night itself was trying to break into my home. It was 3 a.m., the witching hour, and the air felt heavy with something more than rain. Last October, my boyfriend brought home a Ouija board, a cheap Halloween gimmick from Amazon, and we'd laughed it off when it did nothing in the attic basement or my bedroom. Just a piece of wood, I told myself, a silly game for kids. But tonight, with my best friend seeking shelter from the storm, the board called to us from its box in the closet, its presence, a whisper in the dark. I was a skeptic, always had been, but as the candles flickered, casting shadows that danced like specters on the walls, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. We sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor. The three of us, me, my boyfriend, and my best friend, huddled in a circle around the Ouija board. The storm's roar muffled the world outside, leaving only the soft glow of 5 candles, their flames trembling as if afraid to burn too brightly. I'd mocked the board months ago, tossing it into the closet after our failed attempts to summon anything. But tonight, with the wind screaming and my friend's trailer too fragile to weather the tempest, we were restless, craving a thrill to cut through the monotony. Let's try it again, my boyfriend said, his voice low, almost hesitant. I rolled my eyes, but agreed my skepticism, a shield against the unease creeping up my spine. We placed our fingers on the planchette, the wood cool and smooth under my touch, and spun it 3 times, our voices blending in a shaky chant. Hello, Ouija. The air shifted a subtle weight, settling over us, as if the room had taken a breath and held it. Who's out there? We asked our fingers, barely touching the planchette. It twitched, then slid to yes, the motion so swift my heart stuttered. I glanced at my friend, her eyes wide, reflecting the candlelight. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The planchette jerked to Q, then darted to numbers 7, 9, a jumbled sequence that made no sense. Weird, I thought, but I pressed on, asking about its age, its nature. The answers were inconsistent, shifting, like shadows, never settling on truth. We spent 2 hours like this, the board pulling us deeper into its game, each question tightening the knot in my chest. "This is crazy," my friend whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "A spirit's talking through this thing." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as our fingers nudging the planchette. But then we tested it. One by one, we hid a hand behind our backs, holding up a number. "What number am I holding?" I asked, my thumb and forefinger, pinching 3. The planchette slid to 3, precise, undeniable. My boyfriend's turn, then my friend's. Each time it answered correctly, even questions only we knew, secrets buried too deep for the others to guess. Something was here with us, and it wasn't playing. The candles flickered their flames, dipping low, as if the air was too thick to sustain them. I asked the spirit to prove itself, to touch us, to move something, anything, to confirm it wasn't our imagination. The room fell silent, the storm's howl fading to a distant murmur. Then, from downstairs, a faint cry pierced the quiet, sharp, and human, echoing up the staircase. My breath caught. Everyone in the house was here, upstairs with us. The stairs were empty, the doors locked the night too late for visitors. My friend's face paled, her hand trembling on the planchette. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my pulse hammering, my skepticism crumbling like ash. We asked again, our voices quivering. "Who are you?" The planchette moved faster now, circling between M and A, spelling mama over and over, a relentless chant that felt like a warning. My friend, her voice cracking, asked if she'd have children. The board repeated, "Mama," its rhythm, hypnotic, pulling us deeper into its spell. Then it changed. The planchette slowed, deliberate, tracing Z and O, looping the letters until the word Zozo burned into my mind. My boyfriend yanked his hands away, his face drained of color, his eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in him. "Say goodbye," he said, his voice sharp, urgent. "Now." We stammered the words, our fingers shaking as the planchette slid to goodbye, the candles flaring briefly before settling. The room felt heavier, the air thick with something unseen watching. My boyfriend sat back, his hands clenched, refusing to speak until I pressed him. When I was 12, He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I played with a Ouija board. It called itself Zozo. It pretended to be friendly, but it lied, fed on our fear. It's not a spirit. It's something worse. My stomach churned. I'd asked about my father, if he'd walk me down the aisle one day. The board had shot to no cold and final a blade through my heart. I'd brushed it off, but now it felt like a prophecy. The days that followed were a haze of anger and dread. I woke each morning with a fury I couldn't explain, snapping at my boyfriend, my friend, even strangers. The world felt darker, the shadows sharper, as if something clung to me, whispering doubts into my thoughts. My boyfriend lost his job the next day. A sudden firing that made no sense. He was good at his work, reliable. Was it coincidence? Or had we invited something into our lives? I researched Zozo, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through forums, stories of a demon that masqueraded as spirits thriving on fear, chaos. Mama. It called itself a cruel mimicry that matched my friend's questions. We decided to destroy the board, driving to an abandoned lot near a crumbling building, the storm's aftermath still heavy in the air. We tossed it into a field, the wood dull against the wet grass. 2 weeks later, we returned, driven by some unspoken need to check. It was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there, or as if something had claimed it. I'm not a skeptic anymore. The dark scares me now. The quiet corners of my home feel alive watching. I see Zozo's name in my dreams, hear Mama in the wind. I'll never touch a Ouija board again. Never tempt that void. Something crossed over that night, and I fear it's still here waiting. The house in Carmel stood like a promise, its white walls gleaming under the California sun. But at night, it turned predator. I was 6, too young to sense the wrongness, but I felt it, a cold weight in the air, as if the walls watched us sleep. My siblings whispered of footsteps, of things moving in the dark, but I thought it was their imagination. Until the night, the attic door opened on its own, and something in the shadows called my name. In 1965, my mother moved us to Carmel, California, chasing dreams spun from magazine photos of white beaches and azure waves. She was a single parent, raising 6 of us with fierce determination, drawn to the town's charm and her church friends' promises of a new start. An ad in the paper led us to a grand house, fully furnished, owned by a woman traveling abroad. She hesitated to rent to a family with kids, fearing we'd ruin her lavish decor. But Mom's warmth and our impeccable manners won her over. She felt the house needed children's laughter, slashing the rent to a third of its listed price. We moved in grateful for the deal, unaware of the cost we'd pay. The house was a 3-level townhouse, tall and narrow, with a mostly finished basement where Mom and I slept. The main floor held a kitchen and living room. The second floor had bedrooms for my brother and sisters, Linda and Melanie, and the attic was home to Charity and Rachel. Strangely, the attic staircase rose from my brother's room, its door a constant presence. For weeks, everything seemed perfect. The scent of sea air, the soft creak of polished floors, the warmth of Mom's smile as she tucked us in. But soon, the house revealed its true nature, a darkness that seeped into our lives like ink. It started small. Items vanished. Key's toys, a favorite scarf, only to reappear in odd places. My siblings argued, blaming each other, their voices sharp with frustration. We heard our names called in empty rooms, the sound fading when we answered. Footsteps pattered up and down the stairs at night, too light for any of us, too deliberate to be the house settling. Mom, exhausted from work, dismissed it as childish squabbles, but the tension grew a thread, pulling tighter each day. I was too young to understand, but I felt the shift, a heaviness in the air, like a storm brewing inside the walls. My brother noticed it first. One night, Ikit, our family cat, slept on his bed, her warmth a comfort. As he drifted off, Ikit jolted awake, back arched hissing at the attic door. He followed her gaze and saw it a dark orb floating down the attic stairs, pulsing like a heartbeat. He bolted downstairs, the orb trailing him, swift and silent. Pictures lining the staircase swung wildly, some crashing to the floor, their glass shattering. He burst into Mom's room, waking us, his face pale. "Something's in the house," he gasped. Mom told him to imagine white light, to chant a word of power, but he refused to leave, curling up on the floor beside her bed, eyes fixed on the door. The incidents escalated. Cabinets opened on their own, their contents rattling, as if shaken by unseen hands. A cat figurine leapt from the living room mantel, striking my brother's head with force. Charity, who shared the attic with Rachel, changed most of all. She'd always been quiet, but now she withdrew completely, spending hours in a crawl space with her pet mice, her only friends. Outside, she'd stare at the trees, murmuring as if they answered. She walked to school alone, shunning our group, her eyes distant, as if caught in a fog. Rachel said the attic was always cold, even in summer, a chill that sank into their bones. Mom tried to fight it. She sprinkled salt in corners, burned sage until the air was thick with its scent. She invited priests, even occult experts, their rituals filling the house with chants and incense. Each cleansing brought hope, but the peace never lasted. The disturbances returned stronger, as if the house mocked our efforts. Mom, desperate for income, sold wigs, hosting parties in the living room. Charity helped style them. Her small hands deft her pride, a rare spark of connection. But one night, during a party, her mouse vanished from its cage in the attic, only to appear on a wig box downstairs, terrifying the guests. Mom was furious, her business tarnished, but Charity swore she hadn't moved it. The mouse couldn't have crossed 2 floors in seconds, yet there it was, a silent accusation. The worst came later. Charity found her mouse's babies massacred in their locked cage, a wild rat somehow inside the lock, undisturbed. She was devastated, her grief a raw wound. Pictures flew off walls, one striking her head, leaving a bruise. She tried using Mom's spell book, hoping to banish the presence, but its pages overwhelmed her. She moved her bed to the basement, seeking solitude, but saw light-colored shadows taunting her, their shapes fluid and mocking. She fled to the couch, refusing to return. The house seemed to feed on our fear, its malice growing bolder. Mom called a renowned priest for an exorcism. We waited outside, the air thick with tension. When he emerged, his face was ashen. "Move," he said. "It won't leave." We grabbed our clothes, rushing through the house as objects crashed around us, pictures hurling themselves at our backs. We fled to a motel, later moving to an apartment. Mom learned the house's history, donated to a church years before it had housed 2 priests found dead in the attic, throats slashed, demonic symbols scrawled in their blood. It had changed hands 5 times in 2 years, before us, each tenant driven out by the same terror. The house still stands in my memory, its beauty a mask for something ancient and cruel. I don't know what lived there, a spirit, a curse, or something worse. Charity never spoke of it again, her silence a scar. I hear those footsteps sometimes in the quiet of my own home and wonder if the house let us go, or if it's still waiting, its doors open, calling us back. The attic door's shadow lingers in my dreams, and I fear one day I'll hear it open, and the house will claim me at last. The night felt wrong, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice. Our home was supposed to be a sanctuary, a cozy split level, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, just steps from the old cemetery. My husband, Our 10-year-old daughter and our 3 boxer dogs filled it with life laughter, barking the clatter of dishes. But that night, the air turned heavy, and something else was here. Something that didn't belong. It spoke to me, and I'll never forget its voice. We'd lived here for years, long enough to know every quirk of the house, the way the floor creaked in the hallway, the hum of the fridge at midnight. Our daughter had always been a sleepwalker, drifting through the house in a daze, her eyes open but unseeing. We'd find her in the kitchen, staring at the sink, or curled up on the couch, murmuring nonsense. It was harmless, or so we thought. That night, she'd fallen asleep on the living room sofa, her favorite blanket draped over her, the TV flickering with a muted cartoon. I tucked her in, checked the locks, and headed to bed, my husband already snoring softly. I woke hours later, my heart racing, though I didn't know why. The clock glowed 1:17 a.m. The house silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. I lay still, listening, and then I heard it. Her voice soft and confused, drifting from the living room. "Where did it go?" she mumbled. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold on the hardwood, and padded down the hall. She was sitting up on the couch, her eyes half closed, her head tilted, as if listening for an answer. "It's okay, honey," I said, my voice gentle. "Go back to sleep." She lay down, still muttering. Where did it go? I reached for her blanket, ready to tuck her in again, when it came. A voice deep and male, sharp as a blade. No. It wasn't a shout, but it filled the room close enough to brush my skin cold and final. I froze my hand, hovering over her. My breath caught in my throat. The voice wasn't my husband's. He was upstairs, asleep. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but the living room was empty. The shadows still. My daughter didn't stir, her breathing slow, and even oblivious to the voice that had just shattered my world. I stood there, my pulse thundering, scanning every corner. The TV was off the windows, locked the front door secure. No one could have gotten in. But that voice, it was real. Not a dream. Not my imagination. It had weight, intent, a warning I couldn't ignore. I grabbed my daughter, carrying her to our bedroom, her small body warm against mine. I locked the door, my hands shaking, and sat on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep, my mind racing. What was that? I didn't dare close my eyes. Not with that voice echoing in my head. Morning brought no answers, only more questions. My daughter woke bright and cheerful. No memory of the night before. I asked if she'd dreamed of ghosts, if she felt anything strange. But she shook her head. "The house isn't haunted," she said, then paused, her eyes sparkling. "Well, except for the dimes." I frowned, confused, and she ran to her room, returning with a small jar filled with dimes, dozens of them, glinting in the sunlight. "They just show up," she said, grinning. On the floor in the kitchen, my bed. I call them Jeff's dimes. My stomach dropped. Jeff was the man who'd died in our living room years ago, before we moved in. He'd been a family friend, kind, but troubled his heart, giving out one quiet evening in 2017. We'd always joked about him saying, if he haunted us, he'd leave money, not trouble. But we didn't use cash, hadn't for years. My daughter had a reloadable card, no coins in her pockets. Yet the dimes kept appearing small and silver, like offerings from someone or something else. "Thanks, Jeff," she'd say, when one fell, tucking it into her jar. But now the name felt heavy, tied to that voice in the dark. The dogs felt it too. That night, after the voice, I'd heard them scratching at our bedroom door, desperate to get out. They never did. That our boxers, loyal and lazy, always slept piled on our bed, their snores a comforting rhythm. But that night, they were frantic, their claws scraping the wood, their whines low and urgent. I let them out, thinking they needed water, but they just stood in the hallway, staring at the living room, their bodies tense. I followed their gaze, my heart pounding, but saw nothing. The air was cold, thicker, like it held something I couldn't touch. I told my husband everything the next morning, my voice trembling. He frowned, his eyes searching mine. "That's why the dogs woke me," he said, his tone uneasy. "They were scratching, but I thought it was later, after you went to the bathroom." I shook my head. I hadn't left the bed until dawn, too scared to move. We sat in silence, the weight of the night settling between us. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he couldn't explain the voice, the dogs, the dimes. Neither could I. Days passed, and the house felt different, like it was watching us. My daughter asked out of the blue, "Do you think people can talk to ghosts?" We'd just seen a movie, a silly ghost story, so I brushed it off, but her question lingered. "Anything's possible," I said, my voice light, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought of my grandfather, a man who'd worked at Roswell of all places back in the 50s. He'd told me stories as a kid, tales of strange lights, voices in the desert, things he couldn't explain. "Never dismiss what someone sees," he'd say, his eyes distant. "You just never know." My grandmother called him crazy, but now I wondered. Had he felt this too? A presence that didn't belong? The cemetery next door didn't help. Its weathered stones were visible from our backyard, some dating back centuries. Across the street, a house stood where a man had killed his wife in 1986, a shotgun blast that echoed in local lore. I'd never felt spooked by it before, not until that night. Now every shadow in the yard, every flicker of light made me jump. The dimes kept coming, one on the kitchen floor, another by my daughter's bed, a third in my shoe. Each one felt like a message, a reminder that Jeff or something was still here. I stopped sleeping, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door, waiting for that voice again. It didn't come, not yet, but the fear stayed a cold knot in my chest. My daughter seemed fine, her jar of dimes growing, but I watched her closely, terrified of what she might see next. The dogs stayed restless, their eyes on the living room, their bodies pressed against us at night. It's still here, I thought, waiting for us to let our guard down. I don't know what Jeff wants, if it's even him. The voice was angry, not kind, not like the man we knew. Maybe it's tied to the house, to the cemetery, to something older, darker. I just know I can't ignore it anymore. Every dime, every shadow, every sleepless night, it's building to something, and I'm not sure we'll be ready when it comes.